and
Okay.
I'm going to let you begin.
Okay. Now, just for everybody, this is a Zoom, so feel free to use the chat function, which I'm sure you know is at that ribbon at the top or the bottom, whichever your computer you're using. Um, and since this is recording, it will be edited. So any questions or comments you make at the end will not be included in the recording. It will only be me giving my presentation. So feel free to use the chat function. When we're finished, we will, Marie will field the questions and give them to me. And then at the end, feel free to unmute yourself. And then you can make comments. But during the program, please keep yourself muted because we don't need phone calls and doorbells and toilets flushing. So, remain muted until the end, and then everybody will be free to say what they want to. Okay. Well, we're getting a group already, so I'll begin slowly. And as usual, it will be about 45 minutes to an hour. If I go too long, Judy, throw a shoe at me or something and tell me to shut up. Um, well, our topic for today is Esther Jungreis. I'm sure a lot of you recognize the name. It was major American magazine. We'll talk about it a little bit later. That dubbed her the Jewish Billy Graham because of her phenomenal speaking style, her flamboyant personality that really charted a new path for women in Orthodox Judaism. And as you know, she gave new meaning to the term Rebbetzin, which traditionally has meant the rabbi's wife, but she really transformed it into a title that she accepted as a very charismatic, preaching Orthodox Jew. So it is really one of the more fascinating New York City personalities in Orthodox Jewish community. So once again, here's the outline. As you know, I retired a year ago from Touro University, so I still have an outline, and I'm still giving this program, which I would have given in my Jewish history course at Touro. So first, who was Esther Jungreis in her own right as a personality? What she encountered in New York City, the Jewish life in New York City when she arrived, the founding of her movement called Hineni, which means here we are or we are here, and her message, a unique message in the United States at a time when so many Jews were assimilating, intermarrying, and disappearing. And then her role as more than a New York Jewish or an American Jewish personality, but going global, taking her message global. Once again, very much like Billy Graham, renting halls and auditoriums around the world and spreading her message. And then today, the situation of Hineni as it is today. So once again, I mentioned earlier, that's me on the right on Rehov Navaim in Jerusalem, where I lived for 5 years, and that is my house cat. That I don't know whether I adopted the cat or the cat adopted me, but we were largely inseparable. So let's get going. Now, who was Esther Jungreis? She was a Hungarian Jew. Now, Hungary was a very important constituent of the Roman Empire. We look at the map on the right, you see that the frontier, the northern frontier of the Roman Empire was the Rhine River which goes through Germany, and the Danube River, which goes right through Hungary and goes through Austria and then down into the Black Sea. And so the Hungarian Jews trace their ancestry back to the Roman Empire, when these frontier provinces, such as Hungary was populated by miscellaneous people from all over the empire. A young guy from Egypt, part of the Roman Empire, could volunteer for military service and be sent to one of the frontier provinces, where to the north they were fighting off these barbaric Germanic tribes and these Slavic tribes, and people like Huns and Varangians and others were constantly trying to invade the Roman Empire. This is a close-up map of exactly where um, Budapest came into the picture. Where you see the X, just below the X, you see the name Quincum, which is today Budapest. It was the capital of the Roman province of Pannonia. And so it is on the Danube River, and it was a fortified frontier town to keep out the marauding nomads from the far north. And so Budapest attracted settlers from all over the Roman Empire. A young guy could make a fortune going up there, settling himself in one of these frontier towns, and then doing business with the barbarians across the way. The barbarians to the north supplied the Roman Empire with amber, the precious resin from pine trees, pelts from animals, as well as lumber and all kinds of slave populations, which were exchanged in Aquiniumcum for glassware, metalware, and other treasures of the Roman Empire. So Budapest goes back to ancient times, and the Jewish presence in Budapest goes back to the early days of the Roman Empire. Well, the Hungarians were a very fierce, proud people who migrated from what is today Siberia and invaded the Danube Valley, took it over, made an alliance with the Roman Empire, and they ended up becoming an independent kingdom. Well, the Hungarian independent kingdom was gradually absorbed into the Austrian Empire, which then compromised and it became the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So even though the fierce Hungarians lost their independence by becoming part of the Austrian Empire, they still maintained half of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. The map on the right shows Hungary in the middle, with Budapest where the H is in Hungary. But the Hungarian half of the empire included Slovakia, included Transylvania in Romania, northern big chunks of what is today Yugoslavia, with an outing in Croatia onto the Adriatic Sea. So the Hungarians, who are not a European people, their language is not Indo-European. It is a language from Central Asia related to no other language. So they had their identity, they had their own language, their own culture, and even in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, they were a major European player. Now, my grandfather's family was from Slovakia, which was part of the Hungarian Empire. Well, when I told my grandfather that I was going to go to Slovakia on vacation, he said, "Oh my God, don't go back to Slovakia. The Hungarians will grab you and draft you into the army and turn you into a slave for the Hungarians." So the Romanians, the Slovaks, the Yugoslavs all hated the Hungarians, and the Hungarians hated everybody else. But it was as heir to the Roman province, the Hungarian and Budapest had a very mixed population with a large community of Hungarian Jews. Now, Esther Jungreis was born in Hungary in 1936. Well, on the left, you see the map of Hungary when it was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Well, following World War I, as you can see the map in the middle, the Hungarian half of the Austro-Hungarian Empire was shattered. Slovakia became part of Czechoslovakia. A chunk of former Hungary was given to Austria. The southern areas of Serbia and Croatia became part of the new country called Yugoslavia. And Transylvania was given to Romania. So Hungary, after World War I, was a very angry country. They had been stripped of their empire, and they aspired to recreate their Hungarian empire and bring back all of these so-called lost provinces. Well, the Jews of Hungary were very much integrated into this Hungarian mentality of Hungary being a major power, playing a major role in European history. And the Budapest population and the other populations of Szeged in the south, Pécs and Miskolc all had large Jewish populations, and they were very integrated into Hungary. The Jews identified with the Hungarians because the Hungarians had migrated from Central Asia and conquered Hungary, just as the Jews had migrated from modern day Iraq. Don't forget, Abraham was from the city of Ur in Babylon. And so the Hungarians and the Jews felt that they were both people who had once had great empires and had lost them. This picture, you see the Szeged synagogue where the Jungreis family lived. So you can see it was built in 1903. This was just before World War I, when Hungary was at its highest point of power. Large synagogue seating 1,200 people. Now, the Jungreis family was a dynasty of Hungarian rabbis. It seemed that every rabbi in Hungary had some connection with the Jungreis family. The Szeged Synagogue of 1903 was built by Rabbi Samuel Jungreis. In fact, many people called it the Jungreis Synagogue. And you can see how elegant it is with stained glass windows, Gothic windows, a blend of Gothic, Romanesque, with a touch of Oriental influence. And so she was born in Szeged in 1938. And this was the interwar period. Szeged, its oldest synagogue, goes back to 1837. Esther's parents were Avraham and Miriam Jungreis. She had two brothers, Jacob and Benjamin. And they were very prosperous merchants in the city of Szeged and very, very prominent. In fact, both of her brothers ended up becoming rabbis in their own right, continuing the tradition of these rabbinical dynasties, which were so important in Eastern European culture. Now, the Hungarians had developed their own unique form of Judaism. They were not Orthodox. They were not Hasidic. They were not Reformed or later Reconstructionist or anything else like that. They had their own unique form, which they called the Neolog Judaism, sort of a new form of Judaism. It advocated for integration into Hungarian society. They suppressed Yiddish, they suppressed German, they suppressed any attempt to revitalize Hebrew except in worship, and they used the Hungarian language. They were largely urban, highly assimilated middle and upper class people. Their synagogue services would be considered more conservative rather than reformed. And so they had a high regard for the Hungarian language and identified very strongly with the Hungarian experience, being a non-European people who migrated to the heart of Eastern Europe, established firm roots, and considered themselves a people different from everybody else. Just like the Hungarians are not Germans, they're not Slavs, or they're not Turks. They are a separate group of people. So the Hungarian Jews identified very much with this Hungarian national identity. They were 100% committed to Hungary and their survival as a separate Jewish expression in the heart of Europe. Now, the Hungarian Jews, like Hungarians in general, were very upset when Hungary lost its empire. Again, you see the map on the upper right showing what became Hungary and the area in the north of Slovakia, the Transylvania to the right of which became part of Romania, the southern chunk which was given to modern day Yugoslavia. So when Hitler rose to power in Europe and Mussolini in Italy, the Hungarians joined with Hitler and Mussolini. And Hitler rewarded them very well. He restored a big strip of Slovakia, gave them a big chunk of Yugoslavia, and gave them Transylvania. And Hungary was restored to the way it had been largely in the Austro-Hungarian Empire. The Hungarian Jews strongly supported this politics because they said that the Hungarian Jews were different from Eastern European Jews. They were not Orthodox. They were not Hasidic. They were not German Reform Jews. And so the Jews volunteered by the tens of thousands to join the Hungarian army. They fought alongside the Nazi army in Eastern Europe. It is estimated that 100,000 Jews served in the technical battalions of the Hungarian army, losing thousands in their battle against the Soviet Union. So this is a very unknown history of the Hungarian Jews during World War II. Now, when the German army was losing the war, many of these Hungarians who were serving in the Hungarian army deserted and fled to the Soviet Union, where they joined the Soviet army, and they managed to survive. Others were exterminated when Hitler saw that he was losing the war. He decided to eliminate the Jewish battalions in the Hungarian army. So this is a fascinating chapter that there was, in fact, an entire semester on the role of the Hungarians when I was doing my MA in history at the Hebrew University. Well, eventually the Hungarians fell out with Hitler, and in March 1944, the Nazis simply invaded Hitler. And Hungary became a part of the Nazi Empire, and tens of thousands of Hungarian Jews, which had been protected by the Hungarian government, were carted off to the prison camps and to the extermination camps. Another fascinating chapter here is the Castern's train, where many of the Jews tried to save themselves and managed to get a train which was supposed to go from Hungary in 1944 to Switzerland. Well, on this train was Esther Jungreis on the famous Katzner's train. Well, Rudolf Kastner, that was his German name. He was a Hungarian Rezno Kastner, rescued some 1,600 Hungarian Jews and made arrangements for them to be taken to Switzerland. Well, the Germans had some questions about this, and they commandeered the train. And Esther and the 1,600 were interned in Bergen-Belsen concentration camp for 1 month. And then they were permitted to continue on to Switzerland, where she and her family and the other six of the 1,600 Hungarian Jews were saved. Well, after the war, Rudolf Kastner was arrested and as a collaborator with Adolf Eichmann. And he was condemned and in spite of escaping to Argentina, this was a rather dark chapter in the history of Hungarian Jews. But at least Esther Jungreis and her family managed to escape. After a short sojourn in Switzerland and then France, by 1947, 11-year-old Esther Jungreis managed to arrive in Brooklyn in 1947, together with Abraham and Miriam and the two brothers Yaakov and Benjamin. She married another Jungreis, a distant cousin, in 1950. This was Theodor Jungreis, which a lot of people fondly remember until today. They had 4 children and were lived in Brooklyn. Brooklyn received many of the survivors of the Holocaust. Borough Park and Williamsburg and other areas in Brooklyn became known as Hasidic Brooklyn. The Hasidic groups, the Satmar, the Bubovs, and the Lubovs, and these other groups tried to reconstitute their rabbinical dynasties, gathering as many people as they could who were survivors. And many of them were very successful in reestablishing these Hasidic dynasties in Brooklyn. Now, of course, not all of the Jews who settled in Brooklyn were Hasidic. It's estimated that today there are approximately 600,000 Orthodox in Brooklyn, of which 100 are members of the Hasidic sects. And as you walk around, you can see by the various hats and the various clothes that they wear that each Hasidic sect is distinguished one from the other. Some of these Hasidic groups were settled, well, we all know of the Chabad, the Lubavitchers, which are from the town of Lubov in Eastern Europe. Satmars, very conservative, Breslov, continuing the tradition of Rabbi Nachman von Breslov, the Bubovs, the Skyver, and many of the other ones, each having its own unique form of dress, its own neighborhood, its own synagogues, and maintaining as much as they can of the culture of Eastern Europe. So their goal, the Jungreis family as a dynasty, as well as the Hasidic dynasties, tried to preserve as much as they could. Now, most of the Eastern Orthodox of Eastern Europe perished during the Holocaust for the simple reason that many of the rabbis opposed immigration to the United States. We tend to think of the Lower East Side as having 500,000 Jews at the year 1900. But you could probably count on one hand the number of authentic rabbis in the Lower East Side, because the rabbis, the Orthodox as well as the Hasidic, told their members, don't migrate to America. The Cossacks in Russia might kill your body, but America will kill your soul through assimilation, through integration, through changing your name and moving to California and completely changing your identity. And so this is the problem that these survivors of the Holocaust faced when they arrived in America. How are they going to preserve the rich culture of the Orthodox and Hasidic of Eastern Europe in America, which featured assimilation, melting pot, becoming an American? Well, the Lower East Side, which flourished in the late 1800s and early 1900s, was very often cited by the Orthodox survivors and the Hasidic survivors of Eastern Europe as an example of an entire Jewish population which assimilated. The vast majority of the Jews of the Lower East Side, since they had no rabbinical leadership, they generally assimilated. And you see the synagogue, the Ansei Shlonim on Norfolk, which still stands barely, but it had no rabbi. It had no religious leadership. And so the vast majority went to the Educational Alliance, and they ended up becoming either Reform Jews or totally assimilating. And this was the big problem that Esther Jungreis and her husband confronted when they came to the United States. They were not Hasidic, but they were Orthodox. They rejected the Neolog Judaism of Hungary. They rejected the Reform Jews, and they set out to save the survivors of the Holocaust. Here again, what was their strategy? Well, Esther Jungreis, as you can see from her book, The Committed Life, was a firm believer in restoring the Jewish family, going back to the rituals of Orthodox Judaism, and having as many children as possible to replace all of the millions that were lost. Interestingly, after World War II, Brooklyn became the largest Hungarian city outside of Budapest. The largest Hungarian city in the world was, of course, Budapest, and Brooklyn was number two. bringing the Hungarian pastries, bringing the Hungarian traditions, and restoring them to in Brooklyn. And so they remained very fiercely Hungarian. As we're going to see, Esther Jungreis went many times back to Hungary, maintained very strong relations with Hungary, and supported the restaurants of the Hungarian cuisine. She and her husband founded the North Woodmere Jewish Center. Now, this was very much in keeping with the post-World War II movement to expand what a synagogue was. It was called the Congregation Or Torah, the Light of the Torah, founded in 1963. They identified as North Woodmere's first Ashkenazic Orthodox shul. Not Hasidic, but a distinctive shul. Now, the shul of the 1960s, as you can see from the picture, it was very modern architecture, becoming very American. And while they used the word shul, as you can see, the official name was North Woodmere Jewish Center. And this was expanding the concept of synagogue from just a house of prayer to a famous place for concerts, for events, for lectures. You might remember the old shul with a pool, where new Jewish centers would establish areas for ping pong, for swimming pool, for basketball. JCC did the same thing, Jewish community centers. So it was not just a place of prayer, but it was a place for Jewish activities across the board. And there you see the picture of Esther and her husband. I'm sure many of you have visited that synagogue in the Woodmere area. Well, it was Time magazine in 1973 that gave Esther Jungreis the title The Jewish Billy Graham. She was very influenced by Billy Graham. Billy Graham got his big start when he rented Madison Square Garden and filled it to the rafters with people as he preached. Well, Esther took the more modest Felt Forum at Madison Square Garden, which seated 5,000. And she emerged as a charismatic preacher, a speaker, a person who could interact with people. Now, like Billy Graham, who didn't establish an independent church, when Billy Graham, I worked at his last crusade here in New York. When people would go to his crusade, the last one in Flushing Meadows Park, he did not have people sign up for his movement. He said, find a church in your neighborhood and attend it. And if you don't have one, talk to one of my guides and they will set you up. And Esther's was the same thing. She was not founding a new religion. She was not founding a new synagogue. She was founding a place where young Jews could go, could gather, predominantly women in the case of Hineni, and then they would get involved in their own particular synagogues. The name Hineni comes from the book of Isaiah. And I heard the voice of the Lord saying, whom shall I send and who will go for us? Then I said, here I am, send me. So here again, Hineni is not the end of the road. It is, I am here. Now it is my responsibility to continue the work, to go on. Again, very similar to Billy Graham. And so this, 1973, was the beginning of her independent career. As you can see from the right in the picture, we see a mixed media by Anshe Kagan. Once again, really portraying the vibrant personality of Esther, where she attracted people, she interacted with them, and as the quote on the left said, she was pure showbiz. As a star platform personality, Jungreis comes on in flashy outfits of white, black, and electric purple, wearing spike heels and heavy eye makeup. All that plus a slight Hungarian accent and a blonde wig make her look like and sound a little bit like Zsa Zsa Gabor. So she shaped her own personality and became a media star. And so her personality was as much part of her message as what she was actually preaching. These are some pictures of her from her first Madison Square event in the Felt Forum. And here you see her trademark blonde wigs. Well, back then, of course, they didn't have all the modern technology that we do, but they recorded them on these little cassette tapes. I don't even know if anybody has a machine to play those anymore, but they are readily available on YouTube and on the computer. So you can actually listen to her style of preaching. But here again, we see with her scarves and her colorful blouses, her heavy makeup, she definitely was a media personality. This is another one of the 73 Madison Square Gardens. If you type in a tribute to Rebbetzin Esther Jungreis, you will see a lot of these recordings, and YouTube has a wealth of documentation from the time of Esther Jungreis. Now, she used the term Rebbetzin, which traditionally meant the rabbi's wife, but she transformed it into a title of her own. Now, she was very careful to speak in synagogues because she dared not usurp the role of a rabbi. In Orthodox Judaism, the role of women is very carefully laid out. And she, of course, with a husband who was a rabbi and two sons who were rabbis, never once blurred the distinction between the role of the male rabbi and the role of the Rebbetzin, saying, I can go this far and no further. She was controversial. A lot of Orthodox Jews found that she was going a little bit too far. Many in the press accuse her of conducting healing services. Here again, these are like the evangelical television preachers who were laying of hands in a healing process. And if you look at this picture, you can see from her face, this is not just patting somebody on the head, and the way the guy is looking at her, that there is definitely a little bit more than a nice pat on the head going on. And she was controversial. Now, she never once used the term healing services. That was a word she once again realized would be going beyond the bounds of the role of a Rebbetzin. She used emotions. Again, strongly criticized by many people, where her followers would break into tears as they would hear her. They would go up and ask to be blessed by her. Of course, they didn't use the word, but her placing her hands, as you can see on the right, where she is placing her hands on the head of a woman. And again, it was this personal touch which she found very familiar with Billy Graham and the other evangelical televangelists who were flooding the airwaves. Here again, we see with one of her flashy gold outfits, addressing preachers, her followers, again using dramatic gestures, especially arm gestures, as if to welcome everybody into her community. She had the Hineni Symphony Orchestra with very famous musicians who would perform for some of her dramatic meetings, which she held in auditoriums and concert halls and even stadiums across the country. She did it also in South America. You can see on the right one of the events in South America when she started going global. Her most famous book is The Jewish Soul on Fire. A remarkable woman shows how faith can change your life. Here again, this is very similar to the evangelical preachers who would go into prisons and the whole thing of changing your life, outreach to people who were on drugs, in a bad marriage. She had a very strong outreach, and it stressed love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and with all your strength. Be fearless in the pursuit of what sets your soul on fire. A very emotional approach to religion. Elie Wiesel, his famous book, Soul on Fire, tried to recapture this same emotional, strongly felt embrace of Judaism. Many people referred to him as born again Jews. Again, strong influence of what was going on in the Christian world at the time. She was very skillful and savvy when it came to marketing. She hired Lisa, who was a big advertising agency, Larson Hill. It was interesting, and again, this was controversial because she hired Lisa, which specialized in religious groups. As you can see, spreading seeds of faith. It was skillful in marketing for Christian groups, for televangelists, and she had no qualms about going for the best. You can see on the left how the Hebrew word Hineni brought peace to me. Again, this healing approach to religion. In the middle, then you will call and the Lord will answer. You will cry for help and he will say, Here I am, appealing to the younger generation who were threatened with assimilation and secular life, calling them back home. I am here. And once again, not the state, but I am here to lead you back. And I heard the voice of the Lord saying, Whom shall I send and who will go for us? Then I said, Here am I, send me, taken from the book of Isaiah. So she hired the best fashion designers, the best lighting, the best musicians, the best choreographers for her events. Part of her marketing were pendants with Hineni. People would get tattoos, which again was rather controversial because tattoos are forbidden for Orthodox Jews. But here again, along with T-shirts and all kinds of other gifts, she would again use mass marketing skills. She had a whole system for teaching kids Hebrew, the new Hebrew through prayer. And this was turn the pages, Hineni, everything is here. Marketing to young children. So it was no longer some crusty rabbi or a yeshiva where everybody was in black. This was part of a Jewish cultural center where the children would enjoy learning Hebrew. But yet again, through prayer. And so this was outreach to the next generation, the children. Her message was very conservative, viciously opposed to interfaith marriages. Even if they agreed that the children would be raised in both marriages or some compromise was reached, she viewed interreligious marriages as one of the worst dangers to the survival of Jews. Against any form of secularization or assimilation, very much pro-marriage, firmly believing the women's role is in the home. Having children was the primary goal. She was anti-gay, lesbian, bi, and all of this stuff is just a step towards assimilation. She treated the state of Israel as no different from any other country that had a large Jewish population. She was not a Jewish nationalist. She went to Israel. She interacted with soldiers. She had rallies and revivals in Israel, but no different than she would have in South America or South Africa or Paris or Berlin. She was very much like the Lubavitchers, a firm believer in Judaism as a religion, with ambivalent feelings about a Jewish state. So she opposed materialism, secular values, assimilation. She was very sensitive to the idea of the melting pot, which was so deeply rooted in American culture. Judaism was the cure. Tradition, tradition, and more tradition. And so, like the Lubavitchers, her goal was to bring secularized Jews back into the faith. She was viciously opposed to the movement, which of the 70s, of ordaining women as rabbis. Rabbi Sally Priestland, ordained in 72, first rabbi from Hebrew Union College, and she viciously opposed it, and it didn't help that Sally Priestland announced that she was a lesbian. This ordaining women rabbis, ordaining gays and lesbian rabbis was, in her view, just another form of assimilation. Rabbi Allen, 78, Bennett, gay Reconstructionist rabbi, she condemned. Rabbi Stephen Greenberg, 83, first openly gay Orthodox rabbi who practiced as a rabbi, Orthodox rabbi, in a congregation from 83 to 1999, when he announced that he was gay and began living as a gay rabbi. She viciously opposed these as simply steps toward assimilation. She was very critical of American Jewish leaders who were more interested in power, influencing the American political system, and influencing Israel than they were in preserving Judaism. For her, the key was not states or governments, but the key was raising children takes a priority over all else. This is the essence of Jewish women. No premarital sex. The family comes first. Children must respect their elders. There is no such thing as a domineering Jewish mother. That was one of her more famous comments where she went into a bitter battle with Philip Roth, who attributed the domineering Jewish mother as a cause of most of the world's problems. But she didn't have any qualms about defending what she thought was right. She was part of the movement, a broader movement called the Baal Tshuva. And this is a movement where young people choose to embrace Judaism. They're not born into it. They may be totally secularized, but many people refer to them as born again Jews. Baal Tshuva, Baal means the owner, and Tshuva comes from the word choice in Hebrew. That to embrace Judaism should be a personal decision. Now, this she shared with Rabbi Menachem Schneerson of the Chabad Lubavitchers, believing that that was the key to preserving Judaism in America, where young people return of their own free will. Now, the Lubavitchers and Esther Jungreis both focused on drug addicts, on prisoners, of fallen away Jews, Jews in mixed marriages, calling them to return to Judaism. Well, to what extent she is being successful, as we can see, Jews by religion is descending to 68 among the millennials. It was up to 81 in my generation, the boomers, whereas more and more Jews are continuing to assimilate. And so, to what extent groups like Lubavitchers and Hineni have been successful is still an open question. Many people have predicted that Judaism would end up totally disappearing through intermarriage, through assimilation, and the book by Joshua Leifer, The End of an American Jewish Century and the Future of Jewish Life. So her goal was to try to stem this trend. She went global. Now, here again, you see her in an Orthodox synagogue, but very significantly, she is standing on the stage. She is not behind the pulpit. She is not preaching. She is giving a lecture. So she again was very careful not to transcend the role of the rabbi. She was dubbed the Rebbitzin of the world because of her world travels, but she was always the Rebbitzin, pushing it to the limits, but never transgressing on the role of the Orthodox rabbi. She addressed the United States Defense Forces, once again demanding that Jews serving in the American forces could maintain an Orthodox Jewish life, even within the highly structured confines of the American military. She took her Volkswagen on tour. You see the Hineni tour with Rebetz and Esther Jungreis going around the country. Yeshiva Flatbush featured her along with the music group Kinneret in Brooklyn. Again, part of this media star where she would give her presentation, her speech, but it would be preceded by a musical entertainment. She went to Brazil, where she gave many presentations in Spanish throughout the South American area, where she would give her presentations to huge gatherings. She encountered, where you can see Menachem Begin, and distributed her book to Israeli troops in the army. Once again, treating Israel like she would any other country as a country with a large Jewish population that needs her help. She was a staunch Republican. George W. Bush appointed her to serve as an honorary delegate to Jerusalem to celebrate the 60th anniversary of the State of Israel in May 2008. Again, like Billy Graham, she prided herself on showing pictures of her with presidents. In fact, Billy Graham was called the nation's pastor, just as Esther Jungreis was very proud of being the world's Rebbetzin. She addressed their Republican National Convention in 1992, cultivated her friendships with George and Laura Bush, Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger, strongly supporting the Republican Party. She also maintained strong ties with Hungary, going back very often to Budapest, getting awards, Women of the Year by Hadassah, Jewish War Veterans, B'nai Brit, Jewish Federation of Jewish Women's Organizations, Knights of Pythias, Christians, Amita Society, and other organizations honored her work. Hineni today continues. Her husband passed away in 1996. As you can see, Theodore Jungreis, 74, was honored, and she continued her work. She herself passed away on August 23rd, 2022. Here again, you see the Jerusalem Post, a Jewish spiritual leader, Holocaust survivor, Rebbetzin Esther Jungreis dies at 80. Hineni continues. They have their annual dinner. They have events, and they always feature one of her more dramatic recordings when they have a Hineni event. They have their Holocaust remembrance event, and they have their website where you can get caught up on high holidays, Hanukkah videos, and of course, donate. These are her four children who have inherited her work. The two boys, Yisrael and Usher, are rabbis, and you see the two daughters who are both married. They established in 1889 the Heritage Center, which you can see on the right, one of the more beautiful private mansions still in New York City on Broadway. So the work continues until today. They have their Rosh Hashanah celebrations, Hanukkah celebrations, again, bringing together as many people as they can. Her videos are easily available on YouTube and other sites where they preserve the memory of the Rebbetzin. A lot of books, the Rebbetzin, Esther Jungreis by Rabbi Nachman Seltzer, homage, many programs devoted to the rabbinate, Esther Jungreis in various languages, again, preserving her memory. She is buried at the old Montefiore Cemetery, not far from the tomb of Menachem Schneerson, which you see on the right, awaiting his hope for return. So that is the thrilling and fascinating story of Esther Jungreis. Here again, that's me. I'm not in Jerusalem then. This is, I'm sure you'll recognize it. This is the Eldridge Street Synagogue in the Lower East Side, which is a museum and has been beautifully restored. I always took my students there for the various holidays. So this is a story of an Orthodox woman told by an exceptional Orthodox woman who charted her own path within Orthodoxy, never once transgressing the border between an Orthodox woman and the rabbi, but yet making a unique contribution to the history of Orthodoxy in the United States and the efforts to salvage the orthodoxy and the Orthodox traditions of Hungary and of Eastern Europe in general. Okay, well, that brings my presentation to an end. Do we have